welcome to episode 7 of Deep Weird. As always, I am Jacob Pittman, and today we are going to be talking about something that I feel like is sort of ignored by the broader paranormal community, or at the very least, put into its own separate category that I don't really think it needs to be in, because it is a paranormal experience that a lot of people have, and that is the classic religious experience. Sometimes you'll hear people refer to things like this as the mystical experience, so that they can kind of get around the connotation that religion has in the West. I think that maybe we have let the wrong types of people in the West get a monopoly on religion, and maybe the connotation of the religious experience wouldn't be so bad if there was more people like Rob out there sharing their story. So let's jump over to the Rob interview right now. People like to feel like the person talking about this kind of thing is sane.
Yeah.
which, and I think you getting a PhD in like a hard science and all that stuff it does a lot to sort of get people on your side a little bit. Mm-hmm. So why don't you just go into like what your PhD is and like who you are, what your PhD is.
Yeah.
And
so
all that. Let's cover all that
foremost,
stuff first.
Physics undergrad, and then now physics PhD as well. So that's not really who I am. I mean, I'm definitely more on the science side of things in my career, but I'm also I like to be creative as well. I got a minor in creative writing, and also I do art and music and stuff like that. So, but as far as the physics goes, I am interested in quantum technology, which specifically is like quantum computers, quantum communication. It's largely like niche So the easiest way to say it is like it would be very useful for niche communications and niche calculations. So it's useful for like chemical creation and testing and also for like encrypted communications. So it's not like a wide range of uses. Like you're not going to have a quantum phone, but it's very good at some of the hardest problems that we have, actually. So, for example, quantum machine learning is a thing that's on the horizon, and plenty of things like that. But what I have specifically worked on, I was on the quantum algorithm side of things for a year or two-ish, where I was working on running algorithms on real quantum computers like IBM, like cloud computing stuff, and seeing how good they are as they are now. So what we're currently, able to work with, how good they are and how good the specific algorithm worked on it. What I'm doing now, after the switch, is now like experimental stuff. So I'm working with creating what's called I guess at this point it's called a superconducting LED. I'm not super familiar with the technology yet. I'm just starting the project, but the idea is you make layers and etch away shapes into superconducting material, and then you can use it to create little electronic devices out of it. So I think the broad idea for this project is to try to get a device that couples the light output of an LED to the quantum states inside the device. So if that makes any sense, that's the general overview.
Why don't you go into your religious background a little bit and maybe talk about how that sort of conflicted with, or if it conflicted at all, because for some people it doesn't, if that conflicted at all with your scientific background.
Sure. I was raised religious. I was raised Catholic. So I think by default, if you're introduced to something when you're young, the idea is to accept it blindly. But as I got older, of course, I came across Reddit atheists and stuff like that online, where you have to be a little bit more intelligent about your own beliefs. You have to actually understand why you believe the thing you do. You're not just like a sheep, right? So part of that was in high school, learning whether or not I really believed in God, like whether or not I genuinely felt that it was like something that was reasonable to believe. And I came out with, I think looking back on it, while I was in the middle of it, I definitely had a couple experiences that were like very clearly leaning me towards God as a real like force in my life that answers my questions occasionally and like makes sense from like my lived experience point of view. But also I had this experience that, like, looking back on it now, I didn't really believe that God was real. Like, I think this is a thing that genuinely Christians don't ask themselves. Like, a Christian doesn't ask themselves, like, do you actually believe that Jesus was a real person who lived and performed miracles and like died and actually rose from the dead? And if you're a Christian, you should believe in all of those things. But there obviously, each of those individual things can be very difficult to either prove or to even like just have faith in based on your own experience. But anyway, my journey through that was to first question. Then I learned that there were things that Catholicism and like theologians that exist in the Catholic tradition had already thought about a lot of those questions and had convincing answers. So in like freshman year of high school, I learned the 5 proofs for the existence of God from St. Thomas Aquinas. Looking back on it now, I don't really find those as appealing as I did at the time, but I do think that like knowing that there were intelligent conversations to be had about God, about the universe and like origins and that sort of thing was really helpful for me to sort of get a foundation in what religion and like faith in a religion looked like for a person like me who really wanted to be a scientist, even when I was in high school. The biggest thing I think that really pushed my experience in the past like 5 years towards religion would be this is funny, but I watched a Joe Rogan podcast. This is like 2018 or something like that, 2019. Where the person who was on was talking about the placebo effect and just a lot of the evidence that comes from the placebo effect. And there's a lot of research, both medical and like stuff I've seen since the Joe Rogan podcast, but both like medical research and well, I mean, medical is the most interesting one, but there's research to suggest that like human beings can shape their own experience with their faith. And so if I was doubting whether or not I truly believed God existed, it would just be better for me to believe. Like I would just have a better life because I would have better health outcomes. I would like be happier. All of these things that come with just like faith in and of itself as a human, like scientifically validated outcomes. So it's just, it was dumb, but it was like, I'm going to make this choice. I believe now. I believe. Yeah, it's a choice. You don't believe unless you choose to believe. Yeah. I think, at first it was like LARP for sure. At first it was like, I'm just going to, yeah, sure. I'll follow along with this. And if it works out, it works out. But as I explained in the experience that I actually had, or the experiences that I've had, it ceases to be a thing that could affect me, could be positive, and it becomes like a physical experience of my day-to-day life that changes my senses and the way that I feel about the world and like how I interact with the people around me.
And it doesn't sound like you've had any problem at all sort of reconciling this with being somebody who's involved in hard science. Like, this sounds like it's pretty easy for you to just put those two things together.
Yeah, I mean, the more you learn about physics and how we measure the universe and like how we come up with theories and models and things like that, the more it honestly makes a lot of sense. So I'm not gonna claim that like we can use science to prove that God is real. I think that a lot of people do not they don't genuinely ask themselves, okay, looking at the evidence of what we can see in the world, what does that say about like the metaphysics of the world? What does that say about the origin of the universe? So like, for example, what does it mean that we have a certain number of dimensions? What does it mean that we have certain mathematical equations that like govern how we actually move in the world? What does it mean for like math to be this language of logic that works? And if you actually study like more higher level advanced physics, there's even more of that where it's like, why would this ever work? Why should this work? This makes no sense. But we find like relationships that that we measure and also that we like have independently come to through just pure math. That it's not, I'm not going to say like it means that there's a God, but it means that you can't look at the world and sort of say, well, I don't know, it's here. You have to ask a couple more questions, I think. It's almost impossible. So this is actually a very interesting thing. We have these really good models to describe the mathematical relationship between like one particle and another particle. It's like the standard model. Standard model is the obvious example, but we don't actually know if like the reason why two electrons repel each other is not actually because there's interdimensional goblins that are like running between them. Like we couldn't possibly know.
Now that we've kind of got enough of your theology out of the way for I think people to understand where you're coming from, and enough of your sort of career stuff out of the way for people to understand where you're coming from, why don't we sort of start from the beginning with your experience? Because you've sent me by far the longest email yet. And there definitely is a point A to point B type of scenario here. Like there's a lot that goes into it.
I think that whenever it comes to a religious experience, or probably even a psychedelic one, I don't think that it can be just the experience itself. It has to be, it's emotional. It's like inherently emotional, and the emotions come from like where you are in life and the things that you've been thinking about recently. So it ends up requiring a lot of details and context. So I'll go through it. A lot of personal stuff. And I think that's necessary in order to sort of get at the power of the experience itself. But I'll start by saying that like, I guess I'll say in 2019 is when I was sort of trying to work back through my faith, making sure that I like, choosing to believe, and then saying like, okay, well, if the Catholic Church teaches that this is the right thing to do, why is that? And then trying to work backward to make sure that it made sense to me. So there's a lot of like reassurance in the theology aspect of it. But I don't believe that I could say that I loved God yet. I mean, everybody who's Christian is going to say that they love God, but there's a difference, I think, between somebody who actually loves God and somebody who says that they do. Not to be like mean, but just to say like it's like a real spiritual journey thing. But anyway, at this point, I'm like piecing together those sorts of things. I do genuinely believe, but I haven't had really like powerful spiritual experiences yet. So the next year, 2020, that's COVID. I was in undergrad and in a dorm room by myself because I didn't want to live at home. So that, I mean, I have so much extra time to think about everything and to like sit in my bed and pray or something like that. So almost every night I'm coming back to myself and saying, okay, like, I'm just like reflecting on my emotional state and how I treat people and things like that. And the start of this, sort of journey is, so I didn't say this in the email. I think it's an interesting point, and it's the first of two major religious experiences, and it's less physical. So it's kind of interesting just to talk about anyway. But, when I was in 5th grade, I was terrified of the fact that I was going to live forever. Even if I went to heaven, eternity seemed so terrifying to me that I didn't want to do it. And I like worried so much about it that I threw up a couple times. My mom was like upset that I couldn't go to school because, I wasn't sick. I was just like worrying. And the solution to that was just, I'm just not going to think about it anymore. So I didn't until college. And I came back to it. At this point, I had been thinking about whether or not God existed for a while. And I came to the conclusion that if God didn't exist and there was nothing, right after you died, like you're not even aware of the fact that there's nothing, there's just nothing. that'd be okay. That'd be pretty cool, because that's like a break from all of the pain and everything that you like deal with in your daily life, being alone and things like that. So I was okay with that, not in like a suicidal way, just in like a, if it happened, I wouldn't be too upset. And then I was thinking, okay, next step. If there was eternal nothingness, if like you lived forever just with yourself in the darkness, in the way that maybe like TV shows kind of like to portray it. And I was like, okay, that's fine too. That's actually okay with me. That's again like a bit of rest, a bit of chance to like just sort of be with myself for a while. And for a while, I mean eternity. Like it just felt okay with me. And so then I asked myself, this is all in the course of like praying. So like I like prayed like a rote prayer thing that I hadn't done in a long time. It's kind of like a mini rosary. It's not quite a rosary, but it's anyway. Anyway, I asked myself, okay, well, what about heaven? What about actually living forever? What about actual like, life after death? And I realized that I genuinely believed that God loved me in that way, that God, like, that going to heaven would mean that God was actually loving me. He's giving me this like euphoric experience to be able to, be at peace with myself and how I treat other people, not like being worried about what people think about me, not being alone, that sort of thing. Not having like these desires to have relationships and to have friends that, pay attention to me as much as I wanted them to. And I genuinely felt that was a loving act, and I like started crying, and I felt really, really cathartic about it. And I started to see gold. And what I mean by that is the light was off in my room. I was about to go to sleep and it's dark, and even when my eyes are closed, it feels like the room is completely bright. It feels like there's like this gold light pouring out from the ceiling or something like that, or from the edges of my eyes. So it's like a physical change. But not that I would like say that there was a light in the room, just that it really felt like my perception had completely shifted in that moment. And this happened again in the second religious experience that I spent most of the time talking about in the email. And I think it's way more, there's a lot more going on in the second one. So I'll just get to that one now. After this, continued with, emotional progression. I was watching Healthy Gamer GG during COVID, and getting a lot of information about mental health I had never considered before. I got more in touch with my emotions, how I felt about how I was treating people, and how I felt about how I felt, like, how I actually felt in my own life. And I think I had gotten to a reasonably good point, and then in the middle of it was doing online dating, and met somebody on a dating app that, it's COVID, we didn't meet in person, and we just talked for a long time. But I had been struggling a lot with meeting people on dating apps. I was actually ugly at the time, not like a self-perception thing. I just was at a very awkward stage of my hormones, and it led me to be very worried about how I was perceived, and I definitely was way too desperate. Not that I was expressing that, but I know that I was pining way more than I needed to. I was putting a lot more on the idea of somebody liking me, about somebody falling in love or that sort of thing. Also, because I'm Catholic, just to put this into context, it's always going to be long-term relationships is what I was looking for. So I wasn't interested in short-term things. I was on dating apps for marriage, more or less. not actually obviously dating people, but marriage more or less. And then I met someone who, for the first time, felt like I actually gelled with, felt like I could talk to, who could banter with me, and was shared a lot of the same sort of sense of humor, of thoughts about the world, sort of about spirituality as well. And she would talk to me for a brief period of time, and then wouldn't talk to me for a long time. So she was mentally ill, and she told me about that, but I felt for some reason that I had gone through this mental health journey myself. Now I can be there for somebody else. And at the end of this journey, there's a light at the end of the tunnel. She'll date me, right? So that's real fun. I strung myself along with this belief that it happened, that it was going to happen. And I was constantly overthinking. I was constantly like worrying about what she was thinking about me, despite the fact that she hadn't told me what she thought about me because she wasn't texting me. And so I was like, obviously coming up with, somebody in my mind who wasn't actually responding as much. And eventually I finally realized like, okay, this isn't working out. So this is like early 2021. So like maybe 4 months of this. This isn't going to work out. I'm just actually going to ask her if she thinks that I should stick around. And then she said no. And I was like, okay, great. We're done here. And I had put a lot into this, so much so that it was definitely the worst emotional period in my life. And also I was considering whether or not I'd ever find love again. In a totally serious manner. And no, it's goofy. It absolutely is goofy.
And I was going to say it is goofy, but I think everybody has a thing like that happens to them. But also, I feel like I should remind the audience, this was in like 2020.
Yeah.
During like the peak of COVID, and you were living in a dorm room by yourself and all of your classes were online. So like, yeah, so whoever you could talk to on the internet was pretty much your only social interaction. Like I think everybody went a little bit insane during COVID. Like I don't think people have really grappled with how much society broadly went a little crazy during like those 2 or 3 years.
Yeah, well, I mean, I definitely felt a little insane. I had always considered myself a very like emotionally stable person, and I was unlocking a lot of emotions at that time. So I think the combination of being completely isolated and also feeling completely isolated was just not a great combo. But anyway, moving on to the closer to what the actual experience was. All this is context to put into perspective how much emotional weight I was putting on relationships and finding love, and I was genuinely considering it never working out again. And I was wondering whether or not that is okay. I mean, I think that at this point I had sort of realized that like desires, and in a Buddhist, like literally in a Buddhist sense, desires lead to like, death, downfall, or whatever. There's something wrong about wanting something in the sense that it like distorts your view of the thing. It leads to expectations that are going to disappoint you, that are going to leave you with like emotional problems and that sort of stuff. So I was thinking, is this possible like with romantic relationships? Can I actually get over how much I want to have somebody who appreciates me, loves me, and like stands being around me? So I was considering this, and at the same time, I was having these dreams where I would have like a female figure in my dream, who seemed to have the same face, but I couldn't draw the face, but I could tell you the general idea of like the facial structure. But it seemed to be the same character more or less in a variety of different types of dreams, where I would have. Sometimes it was like a super vivid experience. Sometimes it was like, a regular weird dream where you're with like people who shouldn't be there at people who you've met like a year ago at like your middle school doing a sleepover in like your gym for no reason. But like, dreams like that where this character would appear, and also like really tender moments sharing a bed together or something. And in each of these moments, either like maybe this female character would like share a kiss with me, or would just be like looking at me, and I genuinely felt I do not. So with the context I have now, because I'm in a happy relationship now, but with the context I have now, I was having real experiences of genuine romantic love. They were dreams, but they were incredibly vivid, and they were real compared to what I've experienced in the real life.
That's interesting. So you're saying that at the time you didn't really understand what you were feeling, but now in retrospect, being in a relationship, you only really understood the dreams after having the experience.
I would say
in real life.
When I had the dreams, I knew that they felt really, really nice. It was like a sample of something that should have be what romantic love felt like. But I didn't know if they were genuine because I'd never experienced it before. I didn't know whether or not it would be real. And once I've actually had it, yeah, I'd say now looking back on it, it's like, yeah, no, I was right. These dreams were authentic in a way. So, yeah, so that was part of it. And then spiritually, I was considering the mystical side of the Catholic faith, and in part, guardian angels. So angels are a thing where like, that's a mystical entity that doesn't need to exist if you only practice religion for its like interpersonal benefits and like loving other people, that sort of thing. Like angels are explicitly a mystical claim. And by that, I mean like, some like, maybe there are some religions that only tell you how to live. And an angel is a thing that only happens in a religion that tells you the world is a particular way. Like there are spiritual beings that exist and that are real. So I was wondering whether or not that's real. I was wondering whether or not that made sense. And one of the things in the Catholic faith, probably in a lot of Christian denominations as well, is the idea of a guardian angel, which is an angel that is assigned to each individual person. Like you get a personal angel throughout your life. When I thought about the dreams, just like thought about the content of the dreams that would make me cry, and I didn't understand why. Like I didn't really understand. Like I up until this point, there weren't a lot of things that were making me cry. Well, there were plenty of things that were making me cry. But when I did cry, I like knew why. It was usually catharsis. It was usually like emotional maturity, something like that. I'm realizing something about my past or myself, and I'm like moving on, growing up. And in this case, I'm like thinking about this, like, I don't know why I'm crying. I don't like, it feels cathartic, but I don't know what's going on. I don't know what the emotion is there. And then like that night or the day after, I had a very particular experience where this is like the bulk of the experience right here. So I was doing my nightly prayer thing, and not actually nightly, but more or less nightly. And this night I was trying to convince myself that I would be okay not falling in love. And the phrase that I would say, or that I said, and that I, looking back on it now, probably didn't actually believe, but was saying to try to get myself to believe, was that like, if it's not your will, then that's okay. Like thy will be done. That's like the line in the Garden of Gethsemane, with Jesus saying like, if it's right for me to be crucified, then that's okay. And so I was trying to sort of think about that as like if this isn't the plan that is necessary for my life, then that's okay. Which is ridiculous because I'm a 20-year-old man that is saying that I'm never going to find love again. But anyway,
So when you say that this was a nightly prayer, well, a semi-nightly prayer routine, did you have like a whole ritual that you did, or was it sort of like a meditative exercise, or how would you describe that?
I would say I started with 1 or 2 rote prayers, which means like the Our Father, Hail Mary, which would get myself in like the mind of being reverent. But then right after that, which I think this is a step that a lot of Christians might miss, instead of speaking to God in like hey, I want these things, or I'm thankful for these things, and like, I'm sorry about these things, I would just sort of treat God, or I guess I would say I would treat him as like a person who is genuinely interested in my life, and I would talk to him, ask him about like how I did in that day, or I would like think about the things that I did if I like was talking to people online and like had some behaviors that I wanted to look at, or how I was feeling. I would sort of treat it as a conversation. Not that I would ever like actually hear responses, but that I was speaking to someone.
And do you mean literally physically speaking out loud or in the mind?
In the mind mostly. I mean, there are probably times where I would like mouth things and it would like sort of, like come out and like whisper speak, but not actually. It was almost exclusively in the mind. Yeah. So yeah, that was more or less it. And if something stuck out to me, like if a line stuck out to me in my head, generally I would consider that it was like God said this thing or like responded with this thing, and this is the thing I need to be thinking about here. Or like I'm not gonna like say that I know that for sure, but just that like in the balance of probabilities, if I'm thinking about this thing during prayer, maybe it has some spiritual significance. So if something like stuck out to me in my way of like thinking through things, then that would be important to me. And in this night, I thought that it was like the "Thy will be done" thing. So I was thinking about this, and again, it's like dark in my room at night, about to go to sleep, more or less. But I mean, these prayers at this point were so intense emotionally that I was like, I wouldn't go to sleep for another hour. But I was like, worrying about stuff. But anyway, so I was there on my bed, like sitting on my bed or sitting up on my bed. And I look around my room and I realize that there's a chair that's normally under my desk that's been like pulled out a couple feet from my desk in a way that I never would do. It was like very obviously out of place. And the chair was such that it was like maybe a half a foot away from the edge of my bed. And it was facing towards my bed, not like directly pointing at me, but facing towards it. As if
So it was pulled out and rotated
Yes.
180 degrees to be like sitting next to the bed.
It was, I would say, not 180, maybe like 100 degrees. Like I, in order for me to rotate that chair that way, I would have had to have pulled it out, rotated it towards the window and my bed in such a way that I wouldn't have been able to get out of the chair and like to the rest of my room, and then left it there, which I don't do. I never did that. It was like a chair that I didn't even use that much. So anyway, all of these things, I'm looking at this chair, and for some reason in that moment, I thought, my guardian angel is sitting in that chair, and that became the truth. That became exactly what was true, and I felt that there was a spiritual being sitting in that chair, and the next thought was like, why is there a being sitting in that chair? And I thought, okay, it was my guardian for some reason. My guardian angel is female, which I've sort of decided at this point whether or not it's real. And I made the connection that the guardian angel was the female character that was in my dreams, that was giving me this like temporary sense of true, authentic, romantic love in the midst of like really intense interpersonal loneliness. And I was so like, I felt so loved. I like moved over to like hug the chair, and I was crying, I'm thinking about all this. I feel so intensely loved, and the room at this point, like my perception of the room has done the thing it did before, where everything turns gold, and I did not feel alone at all. I felt very, very held in a way, like very like physically held, and almost immediately after that, I like the ending of this emotional moment for me, not the physical moment, but the emotional one was, if God loves me this much, this intensely in a very perfect way for even such a brief moment, like I'll be okay. I can get through not having ever felt or feeling true romantic love if like it was like such a beautiful experience, such a beautiful feeling that like I'm okay. I'm okay with it never happening again. So that was the emotional conclusion. The physical conclusion was that after I was hugging the chair, and then I let go of the chair, had that realization, and then sort of slowly the room faded back to darkness, empty, like nobody was sitting in the chair. But I just want to stress that the actual like physical manifestation of the moment was so intense that in the moment I'm like, this is like, no one will ever believe me that this is actually happening. And I don't need them to. I know that it happened. This does not require proof in the physical sense. I know that there was I know that my guardian angel was sitting in that chair. So that's how I felt about it. That was the moment.
And when you say that the room sort of like, and I've done enough meditation and stuff to kind of understand what you're talking about, where there's like a vibe that fades back to normal. Yeah. So like I kind of know what you mean, but when you say that like golden aura that was around the room, did that also like sort of physically fade out?
Yeah, it physically faded out until it was just dark. Yeah. I think that's all that has to do with that actual experience by itself. I will say, I think it really helped me emotionally. Like I had like long lasting benefits from it. I don't think I've ever really felt alone in like a devastating way since then.
Yeah. That was going to be my follow-up question was, so you're saying that immediately after this, all of this sort of emotional feelings of like angst and loneliness over having trouble dating and like being isolated in the pandemic, all that stuff is just like gone like the next day?
I think it wasn't gone, but it was gone in the sense that like I didn't have to worry about it anymore, and eventually it faded away within like a couple days, I'd say. I think that like I still like wanted to be in a romantic relationship, every once in a while, I guess. But the like emotional pain that came with it, I never felt that intensely again. No.
I mean, how did this, because you said you already said that you're in a relationship now that I assume is stable.
Yeah, we're engaged.
Well, congratulations, first of all. How do you think that experience informed you getting into a relationship with this person, if it did at all?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I went on several dates, and on each of them I realized that I like was okay with saying no to people I wasn't really interested in. Like before then I probably would have pushed it way too long, and then it would have like led into something unhealthy. But I was okay with like, oh, this person doesn't respond to me in the way that I want them to. That's okay. I'll just not text them back or something.
Right.
Yeah.
So you didn't have those sort of like feelings of desperation that you had before, where you'd just be like trying to make it work with somebody who was like less than ideal.
Definitely. And then in the actual relationship itself, I mean, even though I had said all these things, like I had been okay with the idea of never having experienced a really perfect love, I think that in my relationship we're both Catholic, and I think that helped because we both sort of gave ourselves to each other very early on, in the idea that like we would be okay spending the rest of our lives with each other. We fell in love like within a month or two, and like we were very okay with like getting married within maybe a month or two. I mean, sorry, well, maybe a month or two after that. And part of that was like, the ability to love. I don't know. There's something. I'm the one detail. I feel like there's two details here, but I can't really tease them out. The one is that like it was really nice. Like actually feeling loved and being loved in the way that I wanted to was really, really nice. And even despite it not being like God's perfect love or whatever I had felt in that moment, it was better than I could have imagined. So I did genuinely feel very rewarded, more or less, by actually getting into a relationship. So I wasn't like ungrateful or anything. But there's also like the desire to communicate that to other, like my realizations and how I felt and like my spiritual stuff to her. If I feel like she doesn't understand it or get it in the same way, because it feels like this is the right way to believe. This is the right thing to have experienced, and it leads to a more satisfying, like more fulfilling life. So I think that I'm like drawn to sort of talk like and to try to get her to believe it or to feel it or something like that, if that makes sense.
Would you say that it is fair to say that experience that you had sort of primed you to be able to sort of take a relationship seriously?
Yeah, I think without it, I would have been I don't think I've ever. So obviously, this is like a kind of self-centered statement, but I don't think I've ever been like seriously unhealthy in this relationship. We're very, very happy together in a way that, like, if I hadn't had that experience, I might have messed it up. Like, I might have messed up a long-term relationship. I might have gotten invested too heavily in some disagreement we had, or some way that I behaved, or some way that she behaved, that would have led to like more difficulties than we don't argue. We don't like, there's not really any, I mean, like, we banter, which is good, but like there's no like spiritual disagreement, I guess. Not that she's like demure or anything, but yeah.
So you're saying that not only did it prime you to be able to like sort of like date and take finding someone seriously, but it prepared you for a long-term relationship in a way that you didn't even really expect until it was happening?
Yeah, I mean,
does that make sense? Like looking back on it, you realize like, oh, this actually prepared me for stuff that I didn't even know I was going to be experiencing until later.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, there were a couple of really small spiritual experiences that were sort of similar to that, in the sense, not similar to that one, but like similar in the sense that I might like come to understand something about God or about like my spiritual life that were very fulfilling at the same time that I was experiencing like personal emotional revelations and things that you might discover during therapy. I also went to some therapy sessions and stuff like that. So those were happening around the same time, and those all were preparing me a lot for like good long-term relationship stuff. But if I'm thinking about like one single event, the ability to sort of live on your own without the need to need someone else's love, to like be okay with somebody being not perfect when it comes to a relationship, like not loving you in the way that you need, not treating you in the way that you think you deserve, which is what that experience is, like the experience I described was preparing me for. Like that ability is absolutely vital in like long-term experiences. I think that like it's so important to like step outside yourself and like realize when you're upset about like not receiving something you think you deserve, or understanding that things aren't going to be perfect, or like seeking ways to make it better because you understand you want this thing. Yeah, I think all of that has been really helpful.
So it really does seem like you kind of did the complete trifecta here, with, because you were in college, so you were like working on like the sort of material, the material sort of like career aspect of your life. You were working on that. You were in therapy, so or you were at least like taking therapy sessions or whatever. I'm not sure if you were like in it once a week, but you were doing something that was therapy adjacent to sort of handle like the mind part of your life. And then you also were doing all of this prayer practice to sort of handle the spiritual angle. I think that you are a better person to give people advice on this sort of thing than most of the people uploading this type of advice on the internet. We, as you know, we're living in a period of time where there is people are always talking about the loneliness epidemic. It's like the buzzword that you hear. People are increasingly more isolated. Younger generations are having a harder time dating. People have less friends. People are spending more time alone. There's probably somebody listening to this right now that identifies heavily with what I just said. It feels like they probably feel exactly like how you felt prior to your experiences, and they feel like they're completely isolated and alone. What do you think somebody like that, what is an sort of an easy step that they can do to sort of get out of that mind prison?
Yeah, I'll say two things. The first is reflect on how you feel once a day or once every 2 days. Reflect on what you did, how you've treated people, what you think about yourself. And I think a good way to frame it is like, if I was in a therapy session right now, what would I be telling the therapist? Because it forces you to reflect on your own actions, about how you're feeling, and it also gets you to. I mean, it's going to eat up your sleeping time, so hopefully you're getting to bed at a reasonable hour. But for like an hour or two, you're going to be like really thoroughly thinking about that. But the second one, and this is something that I can't. I can't recommend it in the sense that it's like you have to do it on your own, and you have to sort of just believe that it's going to work. Spiritual experiences are, I think that therapeutic and like personal emotional growth is definitely important, but it is only half of it. And I think that there's evidence to suggest like that the psychoactive drugs and stuff like that can give you the same sort of lasting mental benefits that spiritual experiences do. But I do think that there really is no way to be like permanently and genuinely fulfilled without some level of spiritual or like, I guess maybe psychedelic experience. I think that this language to me was really powerful. It's super not, it's like it's a perfect combination of emotional, spiritual, and physics. So, I felt like all of my friends, all of my family, all of my like romantic tries or whatever, I felt so distant from other people, regardless of what I did. I felt like I was in the middle of an ocean and that there wasn't anybody even beyond the horizon. Or like the only people that were there were beyond the horizon, like so far out of reach. And nobody was like trying to get to me. I just felt like completely, it separated. And I realized, and this is something that helped me through isolation, that I'm going to say it. I'm going to say some religious stuff, that God was holding me the entire time, that air molecules are made up of the substance of God, that literally the entire universe, and this is, you can use the psychedelic language or the like Buddhist language, the entire universe is made up of something that like loves you, that created you, that brought you into existence, that keeps you alive, that is touching you at every moment, that like the air molecules in your clothes and like in the wind and stuff like that, and your car seat and stuff like everything is surrounding you and holding you, and it always has been. It has always loved you and will always continue to love you. That really, like, genuinely left a huge impact on me as well. That, like, that realization, the spiritual realization, that I can't be alone, I'm permanently surrounded by love, that really helped as well.
Okay, Olivia, we are back once again. What do you think about the Catholic tradition and the God?
I'm not so sure on religion, but I think that what he was describing is religion at its best. Is like that's what it should be for, is bettering yourself. And not to say that he was doing religion right, but yeah, basically.
Yeah, there's a lot of interesting stuff in here. One of the things that jumped out at me the first time we were talking about this is he talks about, so when he's telling the story about how his like practice that he did that like kind of induced this experience, he talks about how he's almost kind of doing like a meditative prayer, and he's also like talking to God seriously as if God is a real person that he's having a conversation with. And the interesting thing about that is if you look at any list of instructions on like how to make a tulpa or how to manifest a spirit or how to like make it so that your house is haunted or any of this kind of stuff, one of the first two things that you do are, the first thing is usually like make something to like channel the intention, like a sigil or like some kind of like an idol or something that can be sort of like a physical thing that is like, okay, this is the thing that I'm, or even just like something as simple as like writing down like a mantra a bunch of times or something, like it's something to like physically manifest the idea. And then the second thing you do is like talk to the thing that you're trying to manifest seriously as if it's a person. And you find that like over and over and over and over again, like some version of that system. I don't know if Rob in this interview had like read up on like, you know, here's how you channel or talk to like an intelligence or whatever. But what he did, most likely by sheer coincidence, lines up with like exactly what people tell you to do. And I thought that was very, very interesting. I also thought it was really interesting that sort of the first strange thing that starts happening is that he starts having like really odd, vivid dreams that he doesn't even really notice the significance of until later. That's also another really common thing that happens with people that start doing meditative practices, is that your dreams get weird first. That's like the first sign that you're like moving in the right direction with what you're doing. I also think that this is just a really, really, really good example of how you can have somebody who's like a really highly educated person in a hard science who is also religious and has religious experiences, and those two things don't really conflict with one another at all. And I think most people are kind of like that. I don't think you get a lot of people like the Richard Dawkins type dudes who are really aggravated one way or the other trying to like make this argument that if you are 100% a rational scientist, you like cannot have any of these spiritual beliefs at all. I think that was just a failed project, and we've seen the aftermath of that. Like nobody really takes what used to be called the new atheist movement. Nobody really takes that very seriously anymore. Like it's kind of a punchline. Like everybody wants to talk about sort of the Reddit atheist because that line of like philosophy and logic didn't resonate with the average person, and it was like kind of bankrupt to begin with. Like the Americans have a really, really, really narrow view of what God is supposed to be because they're looking at it specifically through American Christianity, which is a hodgepodge of Protestant sects, like each one more maniacal than the last. And when you look at somebody like Rob, who has a much more sophisticated idea of God, like at the end of the interview, when he's talking about how like it literally is like everything. It's like the molecules in the air. It's like the polyester on your car seat, like the entire universe collectively that's around you. Like that is what God is. And that is much more of a Eastern philosophical idea and a much more complex conception of what God is and how it works. And the atheist criticism, the sort of now outdated atheist criticism of fundamental Christianity, or I should say like fundamental Abrahamic religions, couldn't contend with that. So people got a little bit smarter, the goalpost moved a little bit, and we started coming up with, the broader culture started coming up with a lot more sophisticated ideas for what God is, and it seems like they're kind of sticking a little bit.
I think it's probably just human nature to have some kind of spirituality, even if you don't recognize that that's what it is. I think we can't help it a little bit.
Yeah, I'm definitely a big believer in like a spiritual reflex that is like underpinning your life and you can't get away from it. Like the hack thing that it, like at this point it's like trite to even say is they're like, oh, well, atheists like also have a religion, because they're like, if you're atheist, you're sort of like living as an inversion of religion, and that in and of itself is a religion. This is like the decay is an extant form of life type argument. You really can't get away from it. Like if you believe that you die and nothing happens and that's just like the end, that's still like a spiritual position and like a functional cosmology that you're walking around using and using that to inform your life. Like the only people that I believe don't really have anything resembling this at all are like the Neil deGrasse Tyson people who claim like, I don't even think about this. These thoughts don't enter my mind, which to me would explain a lot of his tweets if those thoughts didn't enter his mind. But like, and that seems rare. Like if you start talking about this stuff with people, they're usually pretty excited to like say something about it. And I also like the attention that he brought to what science can do and what it can't do. Because right now we are living in the golden age of what is called scientism, which is that science can give you the truth. So like the other day, let me give you an example. The other day, I was watching one of my science podcasts, and this theoretical physicist said, or no, she wasn't a theoretical physicist. She was a an astrophysicist, and she said the Big Bang is true. And the Big Bang isn't true. The Big Bang is the most statistically likely possibility based on the current evidence that we have. You can't say that it definitely happened and is true. You can only say that's our best prediction, and that's the one that like fits all of our models. That thing that Rob said about how we can calculate how electrons like bounce off one another, but we don't know if there's like a microscopic goblin that's catching the electrons and like throwing them in two different directions and they're not actually interacting with each other. That is like a classic thought experiment that is designed to make the point that I'm trying to make, which is that you can't really get fundamental truths out of science. That's not what it is, and that's not what it's for. And I think a lot of science communicators that operate in the culture broadly, like Brian Greene and Sean Carroll and all these guys, I think a lot of them are kind of doing scientism, or at the very least, they are talking about a lot of the stuff that they talk about in kind of a unnuanced layman way, because they're trying to communicate with regular people, that perpetuates scientism and really, I think, drives the public's mistrust of science even more so. What do you think about the loneliness epidemic incel angle here that was kind of bubbling up in the subtext?
I know you didn't just call my man Rob an incel.
He's engaged.
Yeah. I think he really well illustrates the point that it kind of is a skill issue.
Yeah, how so?
I just think it's important to come to the same conclusion that he came to, where it's like, you know what? I don't need this to survive. It's fine, but it would be cool, but I'm not gonna like freak out bad if I can't find love.
Well, to me, I think the most important thing that he talks about is you need to actually like have conversations with yourself and do like self-reflection and make course corrections. You can't like, and this is one of the things that's so difficult, is that people get into this like this loneliness trap where they're probably working a terrible job and they don't really have very many friends, and they just like come home and get on the internet for their 4 hours of free time, or like watch a Netflix show, or do both at the same time, more than likely. And like, it's a trap that you get stuck in. Like this obviously isn't easy to get out of, otherwise people would just do it. But I think that idea of like reflecting a little bit on like, what did I do today? How do I feel about what I did today? Is there anything that I could have done that was like different? Like, should I have gone outside? Should I have worked on one of those things that I keep saying I'm going to work on? Should I have like done dishes? Like that kind of stuff, I think is, and I said like, what would be a good first step? And that was the answer that he had. And I think that he's right. That is a good first step, to be able to just stop and like take inventory of your life in a self-aware way. And that loops back around to the whole religion and spirituality thing, because like you said, I think when religion is at its best, it functions as a tool that allows you to do that in some way. The last thing that I did want to talk about was kind of the big sort of paranormal event I feel like that happens in this is that like physical vision that he has of like that gold vignette that's like glowing around the room.
Oh yeah.
That is very interesting. I've like meditated off and on a little bit, and I've had like some like really low level meditative experiences. And I think that this is definitely an example of somebody who by like complete accident, which I think is what makes this story really interesting, accidentally started living like an ascetic lifestyle. Like he was accidentally isolated into a dorm. He, through like circumstances of his life, was like interested in this stuff in like religion, and was like taking inventory of it. At about that same time, he started doing this like meditative prayer ritual and was doing these like esoteric occult steps to like having an experience. And then it like happened. Like he objectively had exactly what people are trying to have when they start doing like various types of meditations. And I think it's funny that it accidentally happened for him. Like this did not seem like it was like, if the pandemic doesn't happen, his life probably goes in a completely different direction. So I guess this is like a really funny circumstantial bullet point for like the monk lifestyle, because that's kind of what he accidentally did. Yeah, I think we can kind of end it here. The interview is pretty long, and I think Rob speaks for himself really well. So I don't know. If you're listening to this, maybe you can try coming up with some kind of a meditative practice and let us know in a 5-star review how it went. Welcome again to the outro segment. I would like to thank Rob again for coming on and sharing such a personal story. And I know this probably isn't very much of a concern for Rob, but I do know that there are people out there in these kinds of STEM and science fields that would be afraid that this was going to be some sort of a risk to their credibility or their career to come out and talk about this kind of stuff. So there might be a little bit of back padding that needs to be done in that regard as well. If you have a religious experience or any kind of paranormal experience at all that you would like to share on the show, please email us at deep.weird@gmail.com. If you want to follow us on Twitter, we are at DeepWeirdPod. We also have an active Discord community. You can find the link to join that in the description of any of my videos over at the Probably Jacob YouTube channel, and also probably on the Twitter, probably on the Patreon, which you should also consider joining if you want to support the podcast. Another important way that you can support the podcast is by giving us a 5-star review wherever you can. Deep Weird is written and produced by me, Jacob Pittman, and the music that you have heard throughout was produced by Griffin Dodafray. Thank you, and we will see you next week.